All right, let's dive straight into this explainer and tackle the high-stakes legal frameworks controlling commercial maritime freighting. If you've ever wondered how the massive, multi-million-dollar risks of moving cargo across the ocean are actually managed on paper, well, you're in the right place. We're going to unpack the exact rulebooks that dictate who's left holding the bag when things go horribly wrong at sea.
Picture a real-world crisis for a second. A vessel arrives in port, they open the hatches, and total disaster. The cargo's completely destroyed. Millions of dollars, just gone. In that initial moment of absolute panic, the first question the lawyers and owners ask actually isn't about whose fault it was. It's not about a freak storm, and it's not about the crew's actions. The absolute first question is always which legal rulebook applies to the specific shipment. That single, seemingly boring choice of framework literally decides whether a carrier owes an absolute fortune to the shipper or, crazy enough, almost nothing at all.
You can really trace this shifting balance of power through three major international frameworks. Think of them as a decades-long legal tug-of-war between carriers and shippers. First up, we've got the Hague Rules from way back in 1924. This was the original attempt at setting a global minimum standard, and honestly, it was incredibly carrier-friendly. It handed carriers specific defenses to just sidestep liability and cap the compensation per package at a pretty low limit. Fast forward to 1968, we get the Hague Visby rules. These updated the older rules to finally account for containerized cargo and bumped up those liability limits substantially, but they still kept things broadly skewed in favor of the carrier. Then the plot twist. The Hamburg rules hit in 1978, and they violently tipped the scales of justice right back toward the shipper. This perfectly illustrates the biggest conceptual shift in these laws. Under the older Hague and Hague-Visby rules, a carrier's liability period was strictly what we call tackle-to-tackle. Now, physically, that means the carrier was only responsible for the cargo while it was actively being loaded onto the ship and actively being discharged off of it. The second it was off the ship's tackle, the carrier was off the hook completely. But the Hamburg rules, they revolutionized this whole concept by expanding liability to full port-to-port coverage. So under Hamburg, the carrier is on the hook for the entire time the cargo is sitting in the port, which fundamentally changes the risk profile. But hey, here is a crucial warning, and it's something you really need to take away from this explainer. Just because the Hamburg rules are the newest, that absolutely does not mean they apply universally. No way. In fact, the Hamburg rules were adopted by way fewer major maritime nations than Hague-Visby. So you can never, ever assume the newest rules apply automatically. You always have to read the fine print and confirm exactly which regime your specific contract, or more accurately, your bill of lading, actually incorporates.
Speaking of which, right at the center of all these rules is the bill of lading itself. We've mentioned it a few times, but you have to understand that this is the ultimate piece of paper these legal frameworks are built to protect. In the high-stakes world of commercial freighting, this single document is the absolute center of gravity. It is basically the cargo's ID card and passport all rolled into one.
It holds three distinct, honestly, almost magical powers in international trade. Number one, it's a basic receipt proving the carrier actually has the cargo. Number two, it's the primary evidence of the contract of carriage. But the third, and for sure the most critical point, is that it is a negotiable document of title. What that means in plain English is that ownership of the cargo, literally thousands of tons of incredibly valuable goods, can be bought, sold, and transferred hand-to-hand simply by endorsing and handing over this one piece of paper, all while the physical goods are still floating somewhere in the middle of the ocean.
Since the original bill of lading is so vital, you might be wondering, what happens if it gets lost or delayed in the mail and the ship arrives before the paperwork does? Well, sometimes people use a letter of indemnity, or LOI, as a quick workaround to get the cargo delivered without the original bill being presented. But man, this carries massive, massive legal exposure. If an LOI is used to conceal the cargo's true condition or to just bypass proper presentation, protection and indemnity clubs, your P&I insurance will frequently flat out refuse to cover any claims that arise from them. It is a wildly risky gamble.
All right, let's do a quick knowledge check to make sure we're tracking the evolution of these rules. Do you happen to remember which specific framework extended the carrier's liability from that narrow tackle-to-tackle window to full port-to-port coverage? Think about it for a second. If you say the Hamburg rules, you hit the nail on the head. And you know, this remains one of the clearest practical differences between the older and newer regimes today. It is literally the difference between being liable only while a massive crane is moving the cargo versus being liable while the cargo is just sitting idle on the dock. So when we stack these all together, it builds a pretty clear legal ladder for us.
Hague set the original global carrier-friendly floor back in 1924. Hague Visby stepped it up in 1968, raising the liability limits and updating things for modern shipping, but largely keeping the carrier protected. And then Hamburg in 1978 shifted the power way further toward shipper protection with those broader liability periods. And there you have it. That is your core legal foundation for maritime freight negotiations.
But hey, let's shift gears for a minute, because here comes a major plot twist. Every single charter party and every cargo claim eventually comes back to one ultimate trump card: seaworthiness. If your ship isn't seaworthy, almost all of those carrier protections we just talked about, they can evaporate instantly. Now, under Hague Visby, seaworthiness is a provable duty of due diligence before and at the start of the voyage. It's not an absolute 100% guarantee that nothing will ever go wrong. Rather, it means the carrier has to prove they took genuine, reasonable steps to ensure the hull, the machinery, the crew, and specifically the cargo containment systems were totally fit for the voyage.
Proving this due diligence relies entirely on maintaining hard, undeniable evidence. For example, you absolutely must have proper cargo sampling, drawn before, during, and after loading. If you skip sampling, your side of a cargo dispute is going to completely collapse for lack of evidence months later, regardless of what actually happened. And equally critical is maintaining a flawless MARPOL oil record book. Every single discharge of oily bilge water has to be logged. Falsifying even one entry here isn't just a slap on the wrist or a company fine. It carries severe personal criminal liability for the officers involved. It's the ultimate litmus test of whether you're operating a compliant, seaworthy vessel.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to take away from this explainer. You can argue over Hague, Hague Visby, or Hamburg rules all day long. You can negotiate the most brilliant, airtight charter party in the world. But if you can't prove with hard evidence and due diligence that your ship was actually seaworthy when it left the port, will any of those liability rules even matter? Think about that the next time you see a massive container ship heading out past the breakwater. And once you've figured out the risk, you have to figure out the price, which is exactly why next time we'll be breaking down the world scale system and how these massive freight rates actually get negotiated.